Next, we'll hear from our very own Congressman Jimmy Panetta with the federal legislative update. I know we're all looking forward to that, this update. It's been a tremendous, some of us think an unfortunate thing, right, that the district has changed so dramatically, but we know that our Jimmy, our Congressman Panetta is always with us, thinking about us and carrying that with him to D.C. We know that it's tremendously challenging times. We know that democracy itself is on the chopping block these days, unfortunately. And we know that we have a tremendous champion in Jimmy to represent our interests and represent the interests of these United States. Please join me in welcoming our Congressman Jimmy Panetta.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate this opportunity. Matt, thank you for that introduction. And of course, all of the good work you're doing, Matt, not just for MBEP, but for an important issue that obviously you're hearing about a lot today. We're hearing about a lot every day, and that's affordable housing. So thank you, Matt. And thanks to all of you for being a part of this. I know that at least from what I just heard, one of the last speakers wanted me to, all of us, to close our eyes. I want to open my eyes because I want to see all of you and all of the good work that you have done and will continue to do. It's so nice to see so many friendly and familiar faces, and it means so much that all of you are willing to be here today to highlight everything that we stand for on the Central Coast. And that's exactly what MBEP does. This is a real opportunity to be speaking to you at the 8th Annual State of the Region, and an absolute honor for me to provide a federal legislative update, but also the chance to show my appreciation, and I think our appreciation, to the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership for all that it does to bring everything together. You can clap, that's fine. To thank MBEP for everything that it does to bring everything that we have here on the Central Coast together and highlight it, but also find ways to work together, to enhance it, and to further it for our future. Now, the thing is, and the thing that I realize, especially in comparing this community to some of my colleagues' communities, is that we are not a monolithic community. We do not just stand for one thing. And let me tell you, the Central Coast is definitely not like some of my colleagues' districts in the center of America. We are so lucky to have our beauty. We are so lucky to have our bounty. But when it comes to our environment, when it comes to our agriculture, we have to know how to balance it as well. And the diversity that this area has in so many ways, from geography to demography to economy to ethnicities to communities to politics, that is what makes us unique. That is what makes us dynamic. Yet I do believe that despite our many differences, it's our unity that makes us strong. Now, I believe MBEP understands this, but what they've also found out over the past 8 years is because of our diversity, being unified on issues can be pretty damn difficult as well. But getting to that point and getting to a compromise is what we do best here on the Central Coast of California. Now, one of the examples we've seen talked about and highlighted recently of that type of unity, of that type of compromise, took place 30 years ago. I believe one of the best examples of what this community has done to come together to create one of our absolute crown jewels. The Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary was a compromise amongst many interests, unifying around the purpose of resource protection, research, education, and public use. But the way it was done, I think, is also something to be highlighted, as I think many of you read about in the Herald and the Sentinel series over the past couple weeks. And what was important and what I heard about in regards to the creation of the MBNMS was that everybody who had a part of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, everybody was at the table. Every voice was heard and every interest was represented during those negotiations. Now, was everybody happy at the end? Of course not. Okay, of course not. But everybody appreciated being part of it, and ultimately everybody felt that they had skin in the game. So despite our diversity, we got that done. And let me tell you something. Now, and I know many of you may laugh, especially if you base your information on what's most in the news, but if you look at what we have done in the United States Congress, especially in the 117th Congress, in just a short amount of time, despite the political differences we're constantly bombarded with on TV, despite those differences, man, we have got some big things done in the United States Congress. The COVID relief packages, many of which were bipartisan, did an amazing effort to keep our economy afloat, keep our poverty rate flat, and really keep us in the race between injections and infections. Yes, they got us through the pandemic, but those relief packages, including the American Rescue Plan, also gave us the foundation upon which we are now able to get through inflation. The Infrastructure Investment in Jobs Act does something that past presidents only talked about: investing in our infrastructure, investing in our roads, our rails, our bridges, our rural broadband, our water projects, our wildfire prevention, our airports, and so many other things. The CHIPS Act basically ensures that manufacturing of semiconductor chips will happen right here in America, rather than having to rely on our overseas partners. The PACT Act is a bill that ensures that my generation of veterans who were exposed to those toxic fumes in Bagram or Balad in Iraq, that they get the services that they need from the Veterans Administration. The Safer Communities Act, a bill which deals with gun violence, the first time Congress has agreed upon something in regards to gun violence prevention since 1994. And yes, the Inflation Reduction Act, that will reduce drug prices for seniors, reduce our deficit, and yes, reduce our carbon output, with the largest investment in human history to deal with the effects of climate change. Now, in regards to those bills, 75% of those are bipartisan bills. And the other 25% is dealing with the Democratic Party, which is a feat in of itself. But let me tell you, that was impressive, not just because of the short amount of time that we've had to pass all those major bills, less than 2 years. But I want to put it in perspective as to the majorities and the makeup of Congress. Now, I know when this president came into office, many people talked about having him pass a New Deal or a Great Society, setting very, very high expectations. Well, let me put it in perspective for you. When FDR came into Congress, he had a 91 Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. When Lyndon Baines Johnson came into Congress, he had a 73 Democratic majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. This president had a 5-person majority. So I put that in perspective because that's exactly why this president, that's exactly why this Congress does many things in a bipartisan fashion, making sure that people with different politics come together and unify behind policies that will affect this country. And let me tell you, these bills affect our communities right here on the Central Coast. As many of you know, the COVID relief packages provided significant federal funding for us here on the Central Coast, our cities, our counties, our schools, our hospitals, our airports, our fire departments, and yes, we funded the police departments. I was able to secure millions for rental relief and community development block grants right here on the Central Coast. Just part of the work that I've continued to do, especially when it comes to affordable housing on the Central Coast, including significant amounts of grants for homeless programs and significant amounts of tax credits, especially when it comes to low-income housing tax credit, that led to the creation of over 2,000 affordable housing units here on the Central Coast. Now, one thing that we heard about today, and that we hear, especially if you're living on the Central Coast, and yes, with the new 19th Congressional District in my travels up to San Jose and down to San Luis Obispo. Yes, I love Highway 101, but that's a different topic. I can tell you that they too are experiencing many of the issues that we have on the Central Coast when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to workforce housing. Now, I appreciate low-income housing tax credits, and I'm a proponent of the LIHTC, as they call it. In fact, we've increased it in Congress to ensure that developers have incentives to create low-income housing. But what I've realized and what we heard and what we know is that there are many people who work here, but they do not live here. There are many people who commute here, but we want them spending more time in our community. And that's why I'm introducing a bill to increase middle-income housing tax credits so that those people who serve, those people who are in the police, those people who are in the fire departments, those people who teach our kids can not just work here, but they can live here as well. Now, I know many of the responses when it comes to affordable housing, it's what about water? Well, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act recently, from that bill, we saw $10 million in recycling from groundwater and recharge for the groundwater and recharge project in Monterey. We saw $20 million in recycling for, $20 million for the project up in Santa Cruz County. It is an example of us coming together, especially when it deals with the water project that I worked hard on and many people worked hard on at all levels of government, the Pajaro River Flood Management Project, a project in which you saw all levels of government coming together and making sure the federal government understood how important it is to build this 100-year protection plan. Now, even though we did all the work and we crossed our T's and we dotted our I's, that wasn't enough for the White House, I have to say. However, when that first round of IIJA funding came out and the project was not funded, I called the White House, and they had an important bill coming to the House floor. And I let them know I'm not about to vote for that bill. And next thing you know, I had someone from the White House in my office. And I let them know it shouldn't come to this. But a few weeks after that, we got our funding for that project. And I'm glad to say we got $150 million to start that protection for the people of Pajaro in Watsonville. Now, there are many other areas in which these bills affect us here on the Central Coast. And I wanted to tell you that to remind you that despite what you see on TV, that things are getting done. But I also want to use an example of something we saw yesterday on TV and what's going on in Washington, D.C. in regards to a hearing about a certain day in early January. But I want to tell you about not January 6th, I want to tell you about January 7th. And we saw that quite a bit in yesterday's hearing, in which you saw Democrats and Republicans, the leadership of our parties, coming together and telling people we need to clear the Capitol because we need to do our job. Now, the emotions that I felt being in my office on that day was anger, but it was also motivation to get right back in and do what we were sent to Washington, D.C. to do. And that's why when I got to the Capitol on the evening of January 6th, I stayed there all the way to the early morning hours of January 7th at 3:44 a.m. when we certified that election. And to me, that's the story we need to talk about. Not the divisiveness and the destruction of the Capitol on January 6th, but exactly what we, as Democrats and Republicans, did on January 7th when we certified the election so that you can do your job come this November 8th. To me, we are not a country about January 6th. We are a country about January 7th. And let me tell you, that's what we do best here on the Central Coast. We come together. We come together despite our diversity, despite our differences. We come together and we unify about this place that we call home. We come together because we understand how important it is to support and strengthen our democracy. That's why I'm proud to be here. That's why I'm proud to say thank you to the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. Thank you.